Okay, so you know how we always talk about how messy reality TV can get? Well, this time, the drama didn't just happen on camera, it happened to the man behind the cameras himself. Carlos King, the so-called king of reality TV, just lived through his own real-life season finale. Except this time, there were no retakes, no producers to edit the footage, and no happy reunion. This was real, raw, and played out right in front of millions. The shocking part? Carlos wasn't just let go quietly behind closed doors. He was fired live on television. And the way it went down? People are still talking about it. It was the kind of moment that makes you gasp, pause the screen, and ask, did that really just happen? But here's the thing, what we all saw on camera was only half the story. Behind the smiles, the ratings, and the perfectly produced chaos, there was something much darker brewing. People close to the situation say this wasn't some random firing. It was the result of weeks, maybe even months of tension, betrayal, and a network turning on the very man who built their empire. So, what really happened to Carlos King? And why did one of the most respected producers in black television get humiliated in front of the world? Buckle up, because this story has everything: ego, power, secrets, and heartbreak. Before everything came crashing down, Carlos King wasn't just a producer, he was a movement. If you loved shows like Love and Marriage, Huntsville, or Real Housewives of Atlanta, chances are you were watching his genius in action. He was the man who knew how to take everyday conversations and turn them into must-see television. People used to say Carlos didn't just make shows, he made stars. He had an eye for drama, a sixth sense for chemistry, and this energy that pulled people in. Cast members trusted him. Networks depended on him. Viewers adored his work. But the more success he got, the louder the whispers became. Some folks in the industry started saying Carlos had gotten too big, too powerful, too uncontrollable. He wasn't just producing shows anymore, he was shaping culture. And when someone reaches that level of influence in Hollywood, it always makes a few powerful people nervous. The first cracks started showing long before the firing. Insiders say Carlos had been clashing with executives for months. There were arguments about creative control, about how far was too far when it came to reality TV drama. Carlos believed in showing life as it really was: messy, emotional, and unfiltered. The network, on the other hand, wanted to play it safe. And in a world built on ratings, safety rarely sells. But Carlos was never the kind of man to back down. He stood firm. He believed in his vision. That confidence, that fire, is what made him who he was. But it's also what made him a threat. And when powerful people feel threatened, they don't argue. They plan. Rumors started spreading that certain executives wanted him gone. They just needed the right moment, a reason that would make it look like his fault. That moment came during a live reunion taping, the very same stage where Carlos had built his name. The tension backstage was thick. People say he already felt it in the air, the way producers avoided eye contact, the way phones kept buzzing in corners. Something was off. And then, in front of the cameras, it happened. Mid-segment, right when Carlos was addressing the cast, a network executive walked onto the set. Everyone froze. It was something nobody had ever seen before. Viewers thought it was part of the show, a dramatic twist, maybe even a prank. But no. This was real. The executive, with the kind of fake smile only TV people can pull off, thanked Carlos for his years of work and then announced that he was no longer a part of the network. Right there. On live television. Carlos froze. You could see it, that split second where his confident smile disappeared and confusion took over. The audience gasped. Cast members looked around like they couldn't believe what was happening. And Carlos, he just stood there, eyes wide, holding the mic that had suddenly gone silent. It was the ultimate betrayal, a man who had built a legacy for others, being stripped of it in public view. He tried to keep it together, even managed a small nod before walking off stage. But anyone who's ever been humiliated knows that kind of pain doesn't go away easily. Behind the scenes, cameras caught him pacing the hallway, still mic'd up, whispering, "They really did it. They really did it like this." His voice cracked. He wasn't angry yet, just stunned. And then, social media did what it always does. Clips went viral. Memes popped up. Hashtags like Justice for Carlos and Network Betrayal started trending. The internet was divided, some saying he'd gone too far in recent years, others saying this was corporate cruelty at its worst. But here's where it gets even darker. Insiders say the network had been preparing this ambush for weeks. Leaked emails later revealed private meetings where executives discussed how to control the fallout. One even said, "The shock factor will get people talking, that's good for ratings." So, while Carlos was out there pouring his heart into every project, thinking he was making magic, others were plotting his downfall in the background. And when that curtain fell, it wasn't just his job that ended, it was his trust, his peace, his entire identity as the king of reality TV. In the days that followed, Carlos went silent. No interviews. No tweets. Just silence. For a man known for always having something to say, that silence was loud. Friends say he locked himself away for days, trying to process it all. People close to him described those days as dark. He felt betrayed by the very people he had made rich. The same executives who once called him family had publicly humiliated him, all for a headline. And then, out of nowhere, he went live on Instagram. The world tuned in. He sat there, in a plain black hoodie, eyes tired, voice shaking. He said, "I built their shows. I made them millions. And they did me dirty on camera like I was nothing." You could hear the heartbreak in every word. He wasn't angry anymore, just disappointed. You could tell this was a man who had given his entire life to an industry that had chewed him up and spit him out. But here's the twist: as he spoke, something changed. The sadness in his tone slowly turned to fire. He said, "They thought this would break me. They forgot who I am. I am Carlos King. I don't just make TV, I make history." And with that, he ended the live. No music, no theatrics. Just silence again. But this time, it was powerful. Over the next few weeks, more details started leaking. People who had worked with him came forward, some defending him, others exposing his flaws. A few claimed that Carlos had been difficult to work with in recent years, too focused on fame, too obsessed with control. But others said he was being scapegoated, that he had simply become too independent for the network's liking. According to one insider, Carlos had been planning to start his own production house, one that would give him full control over his shows. That didn't sit well with the executives. They saw it as a betrayal. They wanted him to stay in the system, not compete against it. So, when tensions flared and Carlos refused to back down, they decided to make an example out of him. And what better way than to do it live, where he couldn't edit the narrative? It was a cold, calculated move, one meant to humiliate and discredit him before he could rise higher. But if there's one thing Carlos King has always known how to do, it's turn pain into power. Slowly, he started reappearing online, posting quotes about strength, resilience, and purpose. Fans flooded his comments with love, calling him a legend, a survivor, and the realest in the game. Meanwhile, industry chatter suggested that networks had started distancing themselves, quietly removing his name from upcoming projects, freezing contracts, and trying to rewrite history like he never existed. It was like watching someone's legacy being erased in real time. For Carlos, that was the hardest part. Not losing the job, but realizing how quickly people forget you once the cameras stop rolling. He later confided to a friend that the hardest night wasn't the firing. It was the night after, when his phone, usually buzzing with calls and texts, went completely silent. "That's when it hit me," he said. "I built all of this, and still ended up alone." But even in the midst of that loneliness, something began to shift. He started reaching out to independent creators, young producers, new voices, people who reminded him of himself before the fame. He began mentoring them, helping them pitch shows, teaching them the game. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about purpose. And that's where the real comeback began. A few months after the firing, Carlos quietly launched his own digital platform, not backed by big networks, but by his own team. It was smaller, riskier, but it was his. And fans noticed. When he finally spoke publicly again, this time in an interview, he said, "They tried to silence me, but you can't cancel what you didn't create." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a quote, it was a declaration. Carlos had gone from being the face of corporate television to a symbol of creative independence. And in that transformation, he found something that years of fame had taken from him: his voice. Still, the emotional scars remain. Those close to him say he's changed. He's more guarded now, more cautious about who he trusts. But he's also more peaceful. He learned that the same industry that celebrates you today can destroy you tomorrow. And that sometimes, the greatest blessing comes disguised as a public downfall. Behind the confidence, though, there's still that lingering pain, the memory of that live moment when everything he worked for was stripped away. It's something he'll never forget. Yet, instead of letting it define him, he's using it to rebuild stronger, wiser, and on his own terms. And here's the bigger truth this story reveals: in the entertainment world, loyalty is often just a performance. One minute you're the golden child, the next you're the headline. The same people who cheer for you will watch your downfall like it's another episode. Carlos's story isn't just about a firing. It's about how fragile power can be, and how quickly admiration turns to betrayal when money and ego collide. But it's also a story of survival. Because even after the humiliation, the backlash, and the heartbreak, Carlos King refused to disappear. He didn't beg for sympathy. He didn't lash out. He simply started over quietly, intentionally, and with the same determination that made him who he was in the first place. And that's what makes his story powerful. Because in a world obsessed with tearing people down, Carlos is proof that you can rise again even when the cameras stop rolling. So maybe that's the real twist here. The firing that was meant to destroy him might just have set him free. He no longer has to answer to executives or fake smiles. He's building something real, something his own. And even though it hurts, he's turning that pain into fuel. Because if we've learned anything from Carlos King, it's this: you can't script resilience. You can't fake strength. And you can't silence purpose. The industry might have taken his title, but it couldn't take his fire. So, whether you loved him or hated him, one thing's certain: this isn't the end of Carlos King's story. It's the beginning of his next chapter. And knowing him, that chapter is going to be the most unpredictable one yet. Because in the world of reality TV, the realest story of all is the one that isn't scripted.